Coming up, as we take a look at the roster for the Brooklyn Nets this upcoming season, is there a clear, ugly smudge upon their depth chart at the shooting guard position? We break down the players, the depth or lack thereof, and what needs to be fixed coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie. Over here, I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or enter the promo code LockedOnNBA for a free water bottle with your purchase. You won't want to take off your Bird Dogs. We promise you that. And the other thing we promise you, Doug, is that the Brooklyn Nets are not necessarily the most complete roster entering the season. And as we think about areas that we're going to watch with a very close eye, the guard position, specifically that shooting guard, could become critical when we think about carrying from the starting rotation into the bench unit and getting real offensive production.
Yeah, look, we wanted to take a look at some of the roster going into this, with the caveat being that I think Adam and I are very much on like sort of team positionless basketball, where we just want to have mostly the best five guys out there for a certain team. And that's usually, often going to win the day without huge differences. You don't want too many ones and you don't want too many fives, and and you kind of want to just be able to, a nice grouping is a good way to go. But when we actually look at the Nets, if you want to go from a traditional standpoint, if you traditionally look at the shooting guard position and what you kind of are offered there, especially among like sort of the best guys that do it in the game, there could be a glaring hole here. I know what everyone's going to say, so I'm just going to start here. Is Mikal Bridges the shooting guard in the team? Okay, I know, I'm sure that's what everyone's going to come in with. I'm not going to label him a traditional shooting guard from this aspect because he's both, I think he's mostly going to guard threes. And maybe even a little higher to start the year. But even after him, I think what you can see on this roster is a significant downgrade in talent, even after him. So even if you count him as a shooting guard, as a traditional shooting guard, which I probably wouldn't even do, the downgrade on him after that is still such a precipitous drop, and actually shows you where a pretty glaring hole for the Nets is going to be this season on the offensive end.
Yeah, if we think about, and even the backcourt in totality here, right? Just to give, if you're not aware, right? Yeah, we think Ben Simmons. We just did the episode. Go back and take a look at that one, talking about him, his role, his excitement, his health, all those good things. Plug him in as the starting point guard. Say that Spencer Dinwiddie is going to be point guard number 2 coming off the bench. Dennis Smith Jr. is in the mix there. But when you talk about even Mikal Bridges putting him at the 2 guard, Lonnie Walker, Dariq Whitehead, who we talked about this offseason as well.
Cam Thomas is in there. Like Cam Thomas.
And I threw Dariq Whitehead out just as the caveat. And then Cam Thomas. And we know we're excited. In theory, we're excited about him. But what I just listed there is, we know that Spencer Dinwiddie needs to be maybe pushed into a more specific role than being allowed to live free range as he was on the back half of this past season. Dennis Smith Jr. is a defensive-minded point guard and maybe isn't going to offer you the full range. Lonnie Walker might kind of be, if his percentages can live up to it, an outside assassin. Outside of Cam Thomas is the only guy here that you would look and say, in theory, can be someone that helps supplement. But we know what his deficiencies are, maybe defensively, from a size standpoint, right? Everything has a question mark, is the point, after Mikal Bridges, right? And that makes it very interesting to look at this team, and maybe relative to other teams around the league. They do not have a check the box and keep going down the list of players and roles that they can use with consistency.
And look, just go back to last season and, say, if we're turning over at least some of the starting personnel here, right? The starting 5 outside of maybe Simmons is going to look relatively the same. They've made huge changes on the bench, right? So, and certain guys are gone, but some of the guys they lost whose skill set they probably could need to some degree, even if we have major problems with them, is in the shoot. So if we're gonna use the shooting part of shooting guard to sort of like make the case here, right?
Who puts the shoot in shooting guard?
Right. And there's really areas, there's, significant areas of concern here, right? Like the guys they lost in the offseason were fine with these moves, by the way. Joe Harris, their best 3-point shooter. Seth Curry, their 1A best 3-point shooter, right? Even like Patty Mills, who none of us really want to see. We don't want to see any of these guys come in through the door by any means, but it wasn't like they got younger versions of those guys when it comes to the shooting part of shooting guard, because they have not really replaced a ton of the shooting in a lot of these moves. A lot of their moves were sort of like upside lengthier wings, or just, guys like you mentioned, DSJ or Lonnie Walker, who don't Walker to some degree, but don't really 1-for-1 fill that hole. So if we're looking at the shooting part of this from the guard position after Mikal, you better hope that Cam Thomas plays a lot, because like other than him, and I'll give you some stats that are kind of alarming coming, here in a second, but just look at this roster and see where the deficiencies are going to be. Even for the flaws that those other dudes I mentioned have, like Harris, Curry, Mills, not to mention KD and Kyrie, right? But like they have a lack of shooting here, and it's evidenced by where they're lacking of shooting at a position where you traditionally get some of your best shooting. and that's just not going to be the case for them this year.
And that's why when you mention those guys, not the KDs and Kyries, we would take that kind of skill set and level of play. But the guys like the Joe Harrises and the Patty Mills and the Seth Currys of the world, it's not about those players specifically, but it's about not only what you lost in their shooting, but what you replaced physically on the roster did not necessarily check those boxes. Maybe Lonnie Walker, you think from an offensive shooting perspective, is the closest thing you have to that. Go look at his numbers. He's not any of those guys that we were highlighting. He's not a Joe Harris. He's not a Seth Curry in terms of what the numbers tell you. So you've created a bit of this hole here. I agree with you. We all are maybe dreaming on Cam Thomas here, but I can tell you, man, you can give me your last thought if you want, but I have the secret mystery weapon that all of the offseason moves tell you could be the solution to that shooting guard problem, Doug. I can get into that whenever you're ready.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at DoorDash. Look, when you're hungry or when you need something for the kitchen, the very last thing you want to do is hop in the car and go run over to the grocery store and try to figure out, grab that one thing you need. God forbid with the kids, they need something like the syrup for the pancakes runs out. That's a DEFCON 5 situation that you're looking at right there. You can get it completely solved just by using DoorDash. Like I said, grab the syrup for your pancakes, you run out of coffee creamer in the morning. DoorDash delivery service, grocery delivery service can get you what you want right when you need it. You can stock up for the week, or you can order some last minute stuff that you're going to need delivered right to your door. You trusted DoorDash in the past to deliver your restaurant favorites. Now just switch it over to groceries too. Look, it's 2023. Stop going to the grocery store. Have the grocery store come to you through DoorDash. You're going to get 50% off your first DoorDash order, up to $20 value when you use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA at checkout. It's a limited time offer. Terms do apply. That's 50% off up to $20. No minimum subtotal, zero delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter promo code LOCKEDONNBA. Don't forget, that's code LOCKEDONNBA for 50% off your first order with DoorDash.
Okay, so as we continue our discussion around what maybe the Brooklyn Nets lack, specifically in their backcourt and at that shooting guard position, as Doug said, we consider the NBA as much as anyone to be positionless basketball, but you still need shooting and you still need scoring. And that's really in the backcourt what we're highlighting here. Doug, it's an easy solve, though. We've talked about this guy over the course of the offseason. We don't know for sure if he'll be here for the entire year. But remember, after the trade deadline, Royce O'Neill was asked to do a lot of different things.
Oh, boy.
But once upon a time, he brought the ball up the court on occasion. And if you in the short term, along with, say, the expectations for one Cam Thomas, Royce O'Neill, and I'm not saying this for better or worse, Royce O'Neill represents the consistency that you want potentially out of that player and out of that position. And noting that all of the guys that the Nets brought in this offseason, outside of a DFS and outside of a Lonnie Walker, they were taking chances on long, rangy guys that are going to play in the front court. So Royce O'Neill, just by stature and maybe by what the team is looking to do here, I don't think necessarily lives up in that 3 and in that 4 nearly as much as he could live in the 2 and 3. Again, positionless basketball. But I can put him on the court. I'm not going to love his on ball all the time. I'm not going to label him a key facilitator for the offense to any extent. But remember, Royce O'Neill is a guy that has never shot below 36% from beyond the arc in his career. And over the last 2 seasons, coming from Utah and being in with Brooklyn, 39% from beyond the arc on 4 and 5.5 attempts per game. And that volume held up after the trade deadline as well. So no Kevin Durant, no Kyrie Irving, no problem for Royce O'Neill. I don't know if this is the answer, but he represents certainly a reasonable solution if the Nets feel like they need to address this and don't believe in Lonnie Walker to be in the door, starting, having that role coming off the bench.
Oh baby, if your shooting guard hopes hinge on Royce O'Neill, I mean, I think we know where the season's going to go. Again,
now, just real quick here. I'm only talking about perimeter shooting. We started with shooting guard, but now let's live in the world of production. Let's live in the world of offensive production. Royce can help you there.
I think he's great. I think he's been a really nice fit for the Nets. I think that long term is not really any kind of solution that they need just in terms of their long term build. I think they've gotten way more out of him. It's been a shame too, because I think they brought him. He did kind of exactly what they brought him in to do. The problem was he was just the kind of player that really probably didn't project long term to be on the team if the team was going through a rebuild and stuff, right? Yep. So that's why we're always a little surprised that he's still on the roster. I'm all for the versatility. I think he punched above his weight for sure last season. I just think he's sort of out of place on this group, just because it's a little too old to really kind of dream on any upside, and not dynamic enough to really be a massive floor raiser. But in terms of what they've given him, sure. And I think you're going to see he's a little out of position defending the two, because he's a little too slow. So that's another problem too. If you're going to label him a strict shooting guard, that defending that position is definitely not a strong suit. He needs to be on a little smaller threes. Sometimes can get up to a 4, but but it's funny because when you look at him and then you look at say Cam Thomas, because maybe you're saying, oh, Cam Thomas is a solution here. That's very shooting guard-esque, but it's on ball stuff. It's more it's more microwave score guard, right? More than strict shooting guard. That's why these things are always a little bit in flux. But it's the funny, the thing is though, even if you go by strict, so sometimes you want to go the best guys, best shooting guards, Donovan Mitchell, let's say, right? Or even Clay. These are the guys that kind of project to be the very best, even Austin Reeves for the Lakers. These are guys that you can see that are sort of next level up, or they're dudes like Kevin Huerter, that just do certain things at elite levels, right? They just bomb threes and can make them all. The Nets don't really have anyone like that, right? They don't have anyone that projects strictly into that role. Even after if you label Bridges this way. And this is sort of the problem. And if you look at where even the Nets are last year, so if we want to take out the shooting and shooting guard, after the All-Star break last year, where do you think the Nets, out of the top 30 teams, where do you think the Nets ranked in just straight up 3-point percentage, just making threes out of the top? Where do you think they ranked after the All-Star break, which is effectively after the trade deadline, and the guys have been playing together for a little bit?
28th.
20th, so better.
But way better.
So they ranked 20th, but remember, that's 20th. Okay, that's 20th in the league, so bottom third, but they also just jettisoned 3 of their best 3-point shooters. Right? So even if you make it up into these other guys, just getting out of Harris shot well last season. Getting out of Harris, getting out of Curry, getting out of Mills, it's hard to imagine them going up, right, in terms of just overall shooting. And I think that's where this guard play is going to be really, especially starting Simmons as point guard. I mean, saying a lot of things here, but there's just so many troubling pictures to paint here on the offensive end.
Well, one piece of pushback that you can provide is that Cameron Johnson was not great from beyond the arc coming over from Phoenix. So you can hope that moves the needle a little bit for you. Now, the pendulum balance is going to be, as you said, you're going to end up with more Ben Simmons. Spencer Dinwiddie, really bad from beyond the arc coming over from Brooklyn, when in Dallas, he was absolutely crushing it in a different type of role. And then you think, DFS isn't going to be a part of this. Lonnie Walker. And this is why, because we can talk about these different options here and what the ultimate fix should be. But specifically on Royce O'Neill, he shot really well, as I said, throughout that process. But Lonnie Walker, for all the things that he is or is not, again, when you go look at his stats, he only shot, he was shooting 36% from beyond the arc last season with the Lakers. He shot 31% the year prior on some reasonable volume, 5 shots, right? He's only shot, going back to his rookie year and second season, when he was taking under 2 3-pointers a game, he shot 39 and 40%. After that, as the volume has gone up, he's never been better than 36% from beyond the arc. So this expectation, while we can think about guys that take a leap as they get an expanded role, that's one thing. But we always come back to when you don't have superstars on your team, and elite offensive superstars, the Kevin Durants and the Kyrie Irvings of the world, everything else becomes harder. So which one of these guys are going to be capable of creating their own space and creating their own shot? Maybe Cameron Johnson suffered from that a little bit, not having another elite superstar ahead of him to open up some of those opportunities. He also got thrust, even in Phoenix, into a more predominant role when they had injuries there. So he was in the starting rotation before coming to Brooklyn as well. These are the things that become tricky, right? I'll go ahead, but this is what becomes tricky because you're hedging on 6 different categories potentially here across a lot of different players and who's going to get to what level.
Yeah, and it's so easy, and just a devil's advocate, this is so easy to punch holes in a lot of these guys' production in the past, right? Like if you look at Dinwiddie's 3-point shooting at 40%, you're like, oh, he's been a 40% three. It's 1-to-1 correlated with playing with Luka. 1-to-1. Right. Like he gets into Dallas, he's a 40% 3-point shooter. He leaves Dallas, he's right back down to like 32%. Right? It's like it's like to the day. Right? 31% in Washington when he was asked to be sort of more like the guy he's in Brooklyn. Goes to Dallas, season and a half there, 40% on lock with Luka. Last year, 29% with Brooklyn. Right? Like, and then same thing with Cam Johnson. It's like, oh yeah, maybe it's a lot easier to shoot threes when you play with like Chris Paul. I don't know, right? Like when you play with Devin Booker, where those shots are just going to be so much cleaner. I mean, Bridges, his carried over, so great news there, and he just became a different player. So whatever. Dorian Finney-Smith, same thing with Dallas. It's like, oh, he's been a 3-point shooter. Yeah, when Luka was on his team, right? And so these guys are. I don't even know if all these guys we can look at past performance and project out future gains, because I just think there's with a lot of these dudes. There just is context around the spikes in efficiency that they had in other stops where you can just, it's so easy to paint the picture. And I just am worried that the Nets are going to see this like glaring hole. And we're talking about it through the lens of, we're talking about it strictly through the lens of like shooting guard, but it just points to what could be just a bigger problem. And I can go right down the line with all these guys and for all the gains, give you a possible reason why. And that possible reason, unless you think Simmons is just the guy now, does not exist on this roster.
And that's why coming up here in a second, I'll tell Doug how we fix this situation. A little bit of Cam Thomas, dash of Royce O'Neill, splash of Lonnie Walker, and everything comes out beautiful on the other side. We'll break it down in a moment. All right, so rounding out the conversation on the concern in the backcourt, specifically the shooting guard position for the Brooklyn Nets potentially. I'll just say, I know, listen, there's a world where Royce O'Neill is gone, early in the season or by the deadline. There's a world where Cam Thomas doesn't live up to our expectations that we're starting to build for him and step into that role. But I do think that one thing that you mentioned there about where we label Mikal Bridges and how he'll set up, I think what becomes a little bit critical is probably actually to look at him as being someone that will more often than not actually play up and down. So situationally, if you want to bring in Cam Thomas, you play Mikal Bridges up defensive assignments, right? You play him up to the 3. If you want to bring in Royce O'Neill, you pull Mikal Bridges back down to the 2 because you get a better matchup for Royce O'Neill. Lonnie Walker, I don't even know if it matters. You go and look at what his net defensive rating is. It's over 115. So you're not thinking about him on that end of the court. You are thinking, again, you're dreaming that he can be this replacement factor for a Seth Curry or a Joe Harris. That to me seems like the starting point because it's the veteran experience and then it's the young high draft pick that you've had expectations for. Royce O'Neill, Cam Thomas. The wrinkle in this probably is the Durant Whitehead that we've talked about before, however high we think those expectations are. And I don't mean start getting ready for Durant Whitehead to come into this rotation, but if he does, it changes your front court. It helps shuffle guys down a little bit. You can be a little more manipulative with your rotations and maybe manufacture better shooting guard success because you eliminate other needs. This is almost the tip of the iceberg, Doug, not to run long, of, void at shooting guard. Guess what? There's also voids at other positions in the front court as well. It's not just this one. Well, if only we could solve the shooting guard problem, we'd be all set. We're kind of burying the lead here. There's multiple holes on this roster.
Oh, you think you had a problem with shooting guard? Go look at power forward.
Right, like,
that makes
no
the shooting guard
problems here.
situation look positively dreamy. No, it's so funny. No, I think it highlights. Look, I think we've been like pretty positive with the Nets in this offseason. We like their moves. We like what they've done. We like the draft picks. We like the free agent signings. We like the upside swings. They're in a unique, weird situation where they are not a complete team. They almost had no path to becoming a complete team following the superstar era coming to a grinding halt. And we knew there was going to be holes. But this is just the reality of the situation. Like, the situation is they do not have, they lack, what they lack is just like super high end talent, right? And so I think their floor is fine. I think they've done some nice things. I think they've given themselves a path to being better in the next few years. But really, when we run down the list of just like depth charts and all this stuff, the problem you find is that you don't have a lot of high-end talent other than probably Bridges. And that high-end talent ends up being such massive floor raisers for all these other guys that the other deficiencies for these dudes kind of doesn't become as important, because it's like, hey, when Kyrie and KD on your team, just have three guys that can play defense and you're going to be in the championship discussion, right? Like, that's kind of the whole story. It's not rocket science at that point. And go right down the list with all these other guys, Giannis, Jokic, Embiid, like all the LeBron, right? The all-time one of these guys. Like, when you have this high-end talent, it becomes less glaring around the things that you don't have. So I know, like, you're mentioning all the other areas that they kind of like maybe might be a bit deficient in. The problem is, without the high-end talent, those deficiencies get really glaring really fast, because now you need guys that can do everything. And now when they can't do even certain things, the cascading effect of the lack of talent becomes a really big problem. And I think that's what the Nets are dealing with here. So yeah, they shipped out some good shooters. They have some other guys, like you mentioned, that I think are interesting, like Durant. I think I'm really excited to see what he can end up being. Pinning your hopes on all this stuff right now is a bit of a devil's bargain. But right, like, I just think the problem is they just don't have, like, the talent's really just not there.
Yeah, and I think on an upcoming episode, we'll take a look at that front court, and we'll probably have some similar discussions, right? What are the value pieces that they have potentially brought in? Who's going to rise to the top out of that group? But it's just, name a team in the NBA landscape that loses two top X players in the league, right? Wherever you put Kevin Durant, top 5, Kyrie Irving, top 15 or top 10, if you take away the off-court quote concerns that people label him with. You don't just those guys aren't two players. It's not we need two guys to replace these two guys. It's we need 5 guys, right? We need to dramatically increase the opportunity to have somebody bubble up. And that's what the Nets are looking for. It's the approach they took this offseason. And ideally, it's Cam Thomas just kind of claims this role, and we get a little bit more excited about having these things cemented. But otherwise, it's a grab bag. So we'll see how it shakes out. I don't know. That's honestly kind of my closing takeaway is, yeah, we'll see. And that shouldn't feel like a bad thing, but none of these dart throws right now, as you mentioned earlier in the episode, you can poke a hole in every single scenario that you want to present. There is not a situation that you label here for the Brooklyn Nets, the shooting guard spot at the backcourt, and go, great, problem solved. Never going to be the case until they're on the court and we're seeing how these pieces play together.
Yeah, and it's going to be fascinating. And I do think I think that the Nets, unfortunately, if I'm looking at like sort of downside risk, and I think as we get really close to the season, we'll talk about like, areas that we're most excited to see and the areas that we're most worried about the Nets going into the season, because I think we have legit reasons for concern, especially legit reasons concern knowing that they probably want to win, right? I think if we were like in last year's Pistons territory or something like that, it's like, am I that worried about it? I'm worried about development. I'm worried about player development, and I'm worried about just like seeing what we have 3 years from now, right? Something like that. Or OKC 2 years ago. It's like, hey, what do we have? Like, how close are we right now? What are the moves we have to make? The Nets are in like this weird middle ground where, because we know the motivations are a little screwed up with the lack of talent, it becomes again more glaring about where the holes are going to be. You can explain all the holes away when you don't have to make the playoffs, or you don't have to win now, or whatever, right? Like, you can go through, it's tough, but you can go through whole seasons like this as sort of a narrative around how you talk about the team. The Nets are not afforded that right now to be able to do it. So therefore, the glaring holes they have will become even more problematic when the loss. Sometimes in the losses in the NBA, you can be like, hey, they lost, but at least there's Victor Wembanyama we can hope that we can get, right? Like, or some of these teams like, hey, maybe it's Cooper Flagg, or it's, Boozer, or whatever these guys that are the next guys up. That's 2 years from now. But
Nets don't have that.
The Nets don't have that. So it's like you can't even dream on that part of it either with the losses. So so when we talk about the problems where they have, with areas where they have concern, those concerns can become a little more glaring.
Yeah, they're now problems. They are right now. We need solutions now. We don't want to wait. 100%. So makes for a fascinating offseason. We got more discussions like this, as we say, looking into the front court, looking at this team overall. We'll keep that ball rolling into next week when we talk all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. But I guess close us out, Doug. I don't know what I was doing there. Stealing your thunder.
Right. Sorry, in the meantime, make sure you
join. Hold on. No, stop. Don't talk. Yeah, tell everybody where to find us. Go ahead.
Join us on Subtext. Throw the banner up there at the bottom so these people can see what we're talking about here. Yeah. Join Subtext. You got one job to do. Throw the banner up here. Join subtext.com/LockedOnNets. Join the Nets conversation with Adam and I. We're texting about the Nets every single day. Loving what we're doing on Subtext. There's a free 14-day trial. It's like less than a couple cents a day when it all works out, right? So and it's just to be able to talk Nets and know you're going to get responses every day with your opinions, thoughts. Throw out your Nets thoughts. We want to talk about the Nets all day long. Subtext gives us the way to do it on a one-on-one basis, unlike some other social media platforms, right? Other places, it's kind of like, hey, you're dealing with a massive group of people that are all vying to get their voice in. That's not what's happening on Subtext. Subtext is just one-on-one text with Adam and I all day long about the Nets. Join subtext.com/LockedOnNets.
Sean Marks at some point over the course of this year may say, the moral of the story is I chose a half measure when I should have gone all the way. I'll never make that mistake again. No more half measures, Walter. You know who that is, Doug.
Oh, one of the all-time great poet. Wait, well, no more half measures, Walter? Wait, who from Breaking Bad is that again?
That's Mike, baby. That's Mike.
Oh, yeah, Mike. Omen Trout? Shoot, I'm blanking here. Okay. Oh, Aaron Trout. Okay, I blew it here at the end, but one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.